This is a pretty wild story. This is job interview fraud. Unscrupulous and almost always unqualified candidates are hiring stand-ins to conduct job interviews on their behalf. Hey, and welcome back. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Preston. I'm a professional recruiter in the technology industry. Today, I'm going to be covering perhaps one of the most surprising and ridiculous news stories I've heard in a very, very long time. This video will be a fun one, but also one that's very important for recruiters and hiring managers to pay close attention to, or you'll risk being the victim of fraud. That's right. A number of reports from major employers indicate the rise of a phenomenon most commonly known as the bait and switch job interviews. These interviews are also called proxy interviews or the fake candidate scam. Simply put, this is job interview fraud. Unscrupulous and almost always unqualified candidates are hiring stand-ins to conduct job interviews on their behalf. Some hiring managers are finding that the employee who shows up to work on their first day is not the same candidate that they actually interviewed. So in this video, we're going to explore the recent rise of the bait and switch interview and review some ways of avoiding becoming a victim of job interview fraud. But before we get started, please consider supporting a fellow recruiter. Give us a like, subscribe, click that bell. It really means a lot. Everyone knows how big of an impact the pandemic had on the hiring process and indeed the greater job market as a whole. While things like video interviews and remote work certainly existed well before the 2020 outbreak, they became absolutely necessary in ensuring the survival of an organization over the last 2 years. Now, even as we seem to be returning to a relative normal and an in-person work is more than feasible, many companies continue to utilize hybrid or fully remote work practices. Some are doing so enthusiastically, while others have tried, mostly unsuccessfully, to get employees back into the office. This tension has led to the so-called Great Resignation, an ongoing phenomenon in which employees are leaving jobs they perceive as strict or rigid in search of greater flexibility. But things like phone or video interviews are common regardless of whether or not a company is conducting their operations in person or remotely. It is now easier than ever to communicate with, screen, and onboard employees from anywhere with the help of telecommunication technology. But unfortunately, it seems like some particularly desperate individuals are abusing this flexibility to propagate the so-called fake candidate scam. Rise of the bait and switch. One of the first recent reports of the proxy interview phenomenon comes from the website askamanager.org. A mid-sized IT organization claims they were the victim of job interview fraud after a new remote hire appeared on video on his first day and was clearly not the same person they had interviewed. While the employee they interviewed was articulate and knowledgeable about the qualifications of the position, the one who showed up for work was unable to recall previous conversations or answer questions they had previously been able to. Additionally, the interviewed candidate discussed being single while the current candidate described having a wife and 3 children. His background was also different. He recounted tales from his time in a garage, which was a far cry from the desk job that the interviewee had initially described. Perhaps most telling was that the new employee had totally different hair and wore glasses. The organization decided to confront this employee about the situation over the phone. He quit and promptly hung up and was unreachable from then on. Another recent report on the bait and switch phenomenon comes from Computer World, where reporter Stephen Von Nicholas shares an anecdotal story involving a candidate being interviewed for an engineering position in the specialized Kubernetes system. Kubernetes specialists are hard to come by, so the company was eager to hire the candidate. The person they interviewed demonstrated true understanding of the systems in place and had past experience, so they quickly onboarded him. However, when the candidate was expected to show up in their first video meeting, a totally different person arrived. He had a basic understanding of Kubernetes, but was clearly unqualified to maintain such an important position. A recent phenomenon? The previous reports are from early 2022, and although the bait and switch interview phenomenon is only just starting to gain widespread attention thanks to a recent Business Insider piece, it appears that knowledge of the phenomenon goes much farther back. An article from Focus Global Talent Solutions describes the fake candidate scam as far back as December 2020, prior to the pandemic. It's clear that the widespread adoption of virtual or remote work and an increased telecommunication had contributed to the growth of this issue. More and more reports of the job interview scams are surfacing, but why are we only hearing about them right now? Business Insider, they assume that many companies are embarrassed about being fooled, as many only come forward with the promise of anonymity. Considering the startling urgency of some of these reports, it's easy to see why employers may not be eager to come forward and admit to being victim of job interview fraud. For instance, consider the case of an unnamed New York agency who hired an IT technician. His work gave him access to people's sensitive personal information. As such, after his coworkers observed he did not demonstrate the technical literacy necessary to complete the job, he had to be closely monitored. They even ended up disconnecting his phone after he was unable to help incoming callers with their issues. The agency soon discovered that he had used the proxy to stand in for him during phone calls and virtual interviews. In another even more startling case, the entire floor of a busy Los Angeles hospital was shut down after an inexperienced technician attempted to perform maintenance on its computer system. As hospital workers were unable to monitor patient vitals, the employees simply gave up and left the building. In cases like these, more than just the company's time and money is at stake. Proxy candidates and job interview scams can be incredibly dangerous and cause long-term consequences for some organizations, their employees, and even their customers. Tech industry especially vulnerable. The job interview scam is unfortunately very common in the tech industry. It was one of the earliest industries to adopt telecommunication, and the issue has only grown since the pandemic began. The tech industry also happens to be one that flourished during the pandemic and now faces staffing shortages as things return to normal. This means employers are eager to scoop up qualified talent and therefore may be especially vulnerable to falling victim to this scam. This being so prevalent in the tech industry, which is the niche I work in, I knew it was so important for me to also cover some ways to protect yourself from this scam. Even if you're not in the tech industry, here are some things to keep in mind when hiring virtually to ensure you're not victim to bait and switch interviews. Identifying proxy candidates. While a job interview scam, it doesn't seem to be particularly common, it's important to watch out because it can get really complex. Sometimes it goes beyond someone doing a simple favor for someone else. In fact, some sources report a small ring of dedicated professional proxies that are paid by the hour and have served numerous clients. Too many ideal qualifications. Being flexible is important in life in general, but it's also important to be a little flexible when it comes to the qualifications of your candidates, because the chances you'll find one with everything you're looking for is actually pretty slim. In fact, if a candidate has every single qualification you've listed in the job description, this is a red flag. It could indicate that you're dealing with a proxy candidate. Realistically though, even the best candidates aren't usually going to cover everything you're looking for, but they certainly will be willing to learn. If a candidate does have all of the qualifications you're looking for, be sure to give them skill tests and do your best to verify their skills from their work history by calling previous employers. Missing contact information. Be sure to double check and confirm that all of the candidate's contact information is genuine and they can be reached. If there is any information missing, you'll want to get that filled in as soon as possible. If the candidate hesitates or refuses, that may be another indication that they're a proxy. Confirm work history and dates. Go through the candidate's resume and confirm that the dates line up, and be sure to contact the previous employers to confirm the information with them as well. Compare resumes to social media profiles. Everyone has an online presence these days, so it should be easy to compare the candidate's resume to their social media profile history. Do the job titles and locations match up? Familiarize yourself with the candidate before moving into the interview stage. Conduct multiple interviews. The more interviews you can conduct with the candidate, the better. In person if possible. Of course, a proxy candidate can show up as many times as they need to, but the longer they have to maintain the act, the harder it will be to keep the story straight. Don't be afraid to ask repetitive questions or have them confirm specific details multiple times to make sure things really do match up. Then, be sure to double and triple check that information with as many sources as possible. You can also have the candidate share a photo ID on camera, which you can then use to further confirm their identity by comparing it to their online presence. What should you do if you're a victim of bait and switch? Unfortunately, there isn't a whole lot you can do if you've been fooled by a proxy candidate. Some have suggested legal recourse, although this is expensive, time-consuming, and may not be effective. After all, if the fraudulent employee turns up and did work, they're entitled to compensation. You should of course fire the employee immediately and start looking for a new one. If you're worried about becoming a victim of a bait and switch interview scam, you should consider reaching out to a recruiter like me for help with the hiring process. And that just about wraps up today's video. Do you have anything else to add about bait and switch interviews? This is a pretty wild story. I'd love to hear your thoughts below. If you like this video and want to see more like it, feel free to give us a like, subscribe, click that bell. It really means a lot. Feel free to also follow me at Preston_Park, as I try my best to also post behind the scenes content daily. Thank you so much again, and we'll see you on the next one.